So we can look at some things like this, and this is a really interesting example I'm going to play to you from a Mozart piano concerto. It's the Mozart piano concerto in D major, Köchel 451, Köchel 451. And within the slow movement, there's a slow movement that is in the key of G, and Mozart writes this melody, and this is how it appears in Mozart's own autograph copy. After quite an elaborate little syncopated melody, we get this passage in C major, which is really very, very simple. There's hardly anything there. He just writes. Really simple stuff. And this is what he writes down, and this is what he gives to people to play. And one of the people that he gives it to play actually is his sister, Nanelle, and his sister is playing it. And she looks at this passage in particular and says, well, there's nothing there. It's almost like there's something missing. And she gets in touch with the brother and says, what's happening here? And Mozart writes back. He writes a letter to his father, actually. Writes a letter to his father. This is in 1784. And he says, oh, can you please tell my sister about that passage in the concerto she was talking about? Indeed, there is something missing. She's absolutely right. There's something missing. I'll provide her with the extra bits. And what's the phrase he uses? I will supply the deficiency as soon as possible, he says. And he writes something to send to her. And so, actually, what he was intending, I think, was that a professional player and someone really well schooled in the style of classical music would get that melody and would probably just add something to make it more elaborate. In some cases, though, he needs to provide that. Most of the times in Mozart scores, he does provide that, so we can see really, how he would have done that improvisation. So, let's have a look at what he wrote and how he would expect the performer to improvise around that passage. So we get this. That's the first version that he writes, and he tells us, okay, what we can play instead. And then the second phrase, this rising sixth, and a chromatic appoggiatura. And he says, what you can do instead, you can rise up even further, rise up an octave. Oh, sorry, there's even more of an upbeat. And then, so there's all that. And then the next phrase, we just go up through this open fifth and down. He says, I like this one. That last phrase, in which the original version is actually written this falling third, it goes from a G down to an E and back up there. And he says, well, for the embellishment, what we can do, instead of going down to an E, we can go up to the E higher. And do that. So the whole melody we get, this wonderful, just elaborate. I'll play you the first version first. I'll play them both back to back, and you can kind of compare the difference. This is the first version that I played to you earlier. This is what he writes in his autograph score. This is what he tells his sister that she can play instead. ornaments that we can start to see that he's playing around with. And as soon as you start to recognize that language and recognize those elements, we know that when we find passages like that elsewhere in Mozart's music, there is that really spontaneous character about it that we can imagine that, how it's, if it was in the modern world and there was a jazz pianist, playing it, the sense of freedom of the improvisation, the sense of spontaneity, which undoubtedly would have been there in Mozart's performance. So we shouldn't be approaching this kind of repertoire and thinking about that strictness and thinking about the intricacy of the markings. There are really intricate, detailed articulation markings right the way through that passage. And it's very easy to get hung up on those, but actually what Mozart's doing is trying to help you unlock that spirit of spontaneity and playfulness in the language and be really playful with it. Well, we do get these wonderful passages like this kind of thing I've talked about, where the fantasy in D minor of Mozart, this wonderful opening, again, broken chords because this is the beginning of the fantasy. This is the bit, often the pianist would have to sit down and get used to the piano first, and the best way to sit down and get used to it is just play, a few arpeggios, a few broken chords. And it's like what I was talking about before, the spirit of improvisation written into the music. This is what you can see Mozart's doing here. He's just getting used to the piano. And there is an argument that says that actually Mozart may have lifted the dampers and kept them lifted for this entire passage, which we can kind of recreate on a modern piano by just pedaling partially. I'm just going to do, I'm not used to this pedal, but why not? Sort of a half pedaling. So far, it's not too bad, is it? Here they start to linger a bit much. Or Neapolitan sixth. And by the time we get to the dominant, I'm really struggling now, But it dies. Look what happens, I've got both my hands free. I can push the stop back in and I can play. The main part of it. So these are the kind of things that we're contending with, okay? This idea that was Mozart playing an instrument, was he writing for an instrument where we actually have these stops and we would have to actually sit the whole passage out and control our fingers very carefully in order to balance that sound? Or was he writing for an instrument where he could actually use that maneuver himself?
So what I thought I would do was just kind of go through a few of the decades of the 20th century. As I said, music was changing so fast. Every decade saw something new. So I've got a little kind of a little bit of music that I thought I would play you from a few of the decades, and then we'll see how we go. So anyway, I couldn't go through this morning without playing some Debussy. And his Prelude Book 1, as I said, is a massively important part of kind of who I am as a pianist. And of course, we all know his Girl with Flaxen Hair. We all know his Cathédrale Anglouti. But one of the other preludes from Book 1, it's number 4. And actually, what's interesting about what he does in this one, in all his preludes, he doesn't put the titles of the preludes at the beginning. He puts them at the end of the piece. It's almost as though it was just an afterthought. And you play the piece and then you kind of get the idea. You look at the end and he tells you what he was thinking. And then you go back and you think, well, is that what I was thinking? So this one at the end, in brackets as well, he's written them all. He's called it the sounds and scents turn in the evening air. I'm not going to say it because my French accent is absolutely rubbish, so I'm not even going to attempt that. But yeah, it's all to do with these sounds and the scents and turning in the evening air. And I think the first thing we have to do is this whole connection of our imagination to help us know what we want to do on the piano. If we have an image, I mean, these pieces are great for actually getting specific images. So for me, when I think of that sounds and scents in the evening air, I can see a landscape, I can see it's almost as though there's a kind of heady mix of energies and colours and sounds, and in the middle of the summer or something like that. And this piece is quite ambiguous. He's got this, he's put it in 3/4, but actually the first couple of bars are actually 5/4. And it gives you that sense of he's kind of got the waltz, but it's not a waltz, it's an ambiguous waltz. And let me just play the beginning. And already you can hear there's an amazing kind of sense of colour. And what we have to do, so when we've got something like this, you can hear all the different voices. You've got your bass, you've got your melody, and then you've also got the different character of the bass at the end of that bar. So here I think we do this all the time, whether we're playing 20th century repertoire or whether we're playing a kind of romantic piece or whatever. We're thinking, whenever we've got chords, it's all about voicing. What is it within that chord that we want to hear? We don't want to play every note all the same. So here particularly, it's exactly the same as if we were voicing something in a romantic piece. You'd want that top voice. And then you have to think, well, what kind of colour do I want on that? Do I want a deep, beautiful legato, or do I want a more kind of pinging kind of... And of course we just have to experiment. And sometimes you'll play something and you think, yeah, that's exactly what I'm wanting today. And then you go back to it the following day and you'll think, actually, you know what, I don't think I do today. But for me, this one, it's all about that. I want to hear a really kind of penetrating quality on the top of that one, and to do that, it's all about using weight into the key, thinking about the weight over at the top end of your hand. And then with these, it's like double bass pizzicato. So those ones, you're thinking of bouncing and lifting out of the key, so you get a different quality and a different sonority to that first note, which doesn't have that staccato on it. So you've got your that one, and those ones, it's like little bells pinging out. These are the first melodic notes that he's written that have the semi-staccatos on them. All the other ones have been pure legato. So you really want to make sure that whatever legato sound you've used on those ones, then these two at the end have a different kind of quality of sound. So it's all about listening, using your ears. It's all about thinking about the kind of quality of sound that you're actually wanting to get from that particular moment within the music.